UFC 303 was just last night where Alex Pereira defended his light heavyweight title against Jiri Prochazka. And today we're going to take a look at what I think the fights to make are after UFC 303. So stick around to hear who I think should be matched up following this pay-per-view. I'm Wyatt, and this is Fight Society. And guys, before we get into the video, I just want to say thank you for 1,000 subscribers. It's been a great ride so far. I appreciate all of your support to this point. We're just going to keep grinding, keep growing the channel. And again, I appreciate your guys' support so much. It means a lot to me. Even though it's not a crazy big number, it means a lot to me to hit 1,000 subscribers. Thank you so much for your support. If you want to support even more, click the link below or click the join button on our channel homepage to become a channel member. So anyways, thank you for 1,000 subs. Back to the video. Okay, so here we are. We're going to go from main card to prelims. We're going to talk about the fights to make after UFC 303. Now, we're going to start off with Alex Pereira defending his light heavyweight title against Jiri Prochazka. Round 2 TKO, head kick, nasty. Pereira's on his way to being the GOAT. I think that there's only one fight to make because Alex and this guy both have limited time in the sport. They're both in their mid to late 30s. They don't have much time. I think we need to make the biggest fights possible for both of these guys. It's not Magomed Ankalaev. Forget him. He's going to have to fight somebody else. Forget Ankalaev. Alex Pereira needs to move up to heavyweight and fight Jon Jones. Forget the Stipe fight. Forget the interim title defense. Make this the biggest fight in heavyweight history. Alex Pereira versus Jon Jones, fighting for GOAT status. Because if Alex Pereira beats Jon Jones, at heavyweight, he's the best of all time. So they're fighting for GOAT status. You can make it champ versus champ. Alex Pereira's trying to get his third belt. Jon Jones wants to beat back the face of the UFC. There's so many ways that you could spin this into being a wildly successful fight. And the fans are going to go for this much more than they will a Stipe fight for Jones. They're going to go for this way more than an Ankalaev fight for Pereira. So forget, let's just throw the whole rankings and what makes sense from there. Let's throw that out right now. Let's talk about the biggest fight that the UFC can make right now, Jones versus Pereira. This is the fight to make for Alex Pereira. Moving on from there to the co-main event winner, Diego Lopes, who went through multiple opponents before he got into the cage at UFC 303, filled in on short notice to fight at 145 against Brian Ortega, makes the weight, actually makes 145, or was on track to make 145. Ortega says, I need 55, I'm sick. So they go and weigh in at 55. Everything's fine. It's a lightweight fight. Saturday comes around. Ortega pulls out with an illness. Dan Ige fills in to fight on 4 hours notice at a 165 catchweight. Diego Lopes ends up getting the win. I don't think he's like title shot worthy or anything like that. I think that you put Diego Lopes up against somebody that he's called out before, his only loss in the UFC, Movsar Evloev. You could kill two birds with one stone with this fight because the UFC wants to push Diego Lopes, get him in the top 5. Get ready for like a Volk, a Topuria, Max Holloway, somebody like that, Yair. And that's what they were trying to do with Brian Ortega. They were trying to get him up there. Ortega pulls out. Evloev, they don't like. The UFC does not want Movsar anywhere near the title. He's boring. His fight style's not good. He's like 18-0 with like 3 finishes. He's 7-0 in the UFC with no finishes. The UFC does not want him touching the belt. And here's what you do. You attempt, even though it's going to be a very hard fight for Lopes, but he did give Movsar a crazy hard fight on 5 days' notice. You have Diego Lopes fight Movsar, fight night main event, pay-per-view co-main event, or feature fight, something like that. If Lopes wins, you kill 2 birds with one stone. Diego Lopes is in the top 5, title shot ready, and Movsar has taken an L and has to fight down in the ladder against contenders, which is what they really want him to do anyway. They do not want him as champion. So Lopes versus Movsar rematch, book it. We move on from there to Roman Dolidze, who is now ranked in 2 weight classes after beating Anthony Smith. He got the decision win, filling in on about a week's notice following Carlos Ulberg's withdrawal. The fight was supposed to be Jamal Hill and Khalil Roundtree. Then it became Hill versus Ulberg, and then Ulberg versus Anthony Smith. And then it finally ended up being Anthony Smith versus Roman Dolidze. Dolidze lives in Vegas. He's an 85er. Honestly, obviously, if there was an easy short notice fight, that was the situation, was up a weight class, no expectations, no ranking on the line for you, almost no weight cut. It's in the city you live and train in. It worked out for him, and he ended up getting a very decisive decision win over Anthony Smith. I don't think that he stays at 205. He might be in the rankings. They might just not put him in the rankings at all. But what I'm telling him and what I'm telling you guys is that Roman Dolidze should stay at 185. And he should fight the guy that he called out last night. He should fight Khamzat Chimaev in October in Abu Dhabi. I think it's UFC 308. You do Dolidze versus Khamzat. Both of them heavy grapplers. Both of them from that region of the world, Georgia and Russia or Chechnya, whatever it is. Fantastic fight. Khamzat, they can't rely on him. They can't keep putting him up against like a Paulo Costa or a Rob Whittaker because they worry that, he's going to pull out. They're worried that he's going to pull out. And so they need to put him in with somebody where if one of them pulls out, it's not like, oh my God, there goes a number one contenders fight, or there goes our main event. Put Khamzat versus Dolidze as the co-main or the feature fight for UFC 308. Put Islam and Arman Sarukian in the main event. Do, Makayev versus Pantoja. If they both win, if Makayev beats Manel Kape, something like that, 2 title fights in the main event, or Umar coming off of a win, if he's willing to turn around fast enough, Umar versus somebody. But just don't make this something that a card will depend on it, because Khamzat's not reliable. Like, that's why it was a mistake to put him in against Rob Whittaker, because he pulled out and the card had to be saved, even though they have Volkov and Pavlovich as the co-main. Fortunately for the UFC, they find a way to fix fights or fill in people when they pull out. But I think you got to make Khamzat like a feature fight or a co-main on a pay-per-view, not the main event, until you can like actually decide whether or not you can rely on this guy. So put him like 3rd fight on the main card in October against Roman Dolidze. We move on from there to Macy Chiasson, who won by TKO due to a cut on Mayra Bueno Silva. It was a very close fight, nasty gash. Silva wanted to continue. Ref and doctor said no. Chiasson gets the win, but this is not impressive enough of a win to get a title shot, especially when you have Kayla Harrison kind of lurking around in those rankings, and you have Raquel Pennington and Juliana Pena allegedly booked already for later this year. And you have the rumor of Amanda Nunes's return floating around. Dana even talked about it recently. There's too much going on for Chiasson to get a title shot off of that. Here's what I think you do. Close fight, ended with a cut where it was a doctor's decision. Mayra Bueno Silva was still completely lucid and in there. I think you have them rematch each other. I think you do Chiasson and Mayra Bueno Silva, rematch it, run it back. No fluky, weird cut endings. I know that it's damage, but rematch the fight. Winner is one step closer to a title shot. We move on from there to Ian Gary, who won very boring decision against Michael Venom Page, exactly as I predicted it to go, except I thought it was going to be more on the feet, but still boring 29-28 decision victory for Ian Gary. That's what I said in my prediction video. Ian Gary does not have the funnest fight style. He's very talented, but he does not put himself into the fire. I think getting dropped by Kenan Song in their fight, I think that fucked with his confidence and his chin. And I think that's going to hurt him when it comes to becoming a fan favorite, because he's very talented. He maybe can bounce back from all the stuff with his wife from last year and all of that, but he needs a big fight that is against another big name, because I don't think they're going to give him a title shot. They could give him Leon right off of a Bilal win. I could see that. What I think the UFC should do, and we've talked about this at length, Ian Gary, Colby Covington. They have beef. Colby's talked about Ian Gary's wife several times. I think you book Ian Gary, Colby Covington, co-main event to Connor and Chandler. If they do it later this year, I'm telling you, huge card. I want to see Colby Covington and Ian Gary. And then maybe a title shot for Ian Gary after that. Or shit, if Colby gets a win, he's probably lined up for another title shot. So this is what I think the main card winners for UFC 303 should do. Pereira versus Jon Jones, Lopes versus Evloev, Dolidze versus Khamzat, back down to middleweight, Ian Gary versus Colby Covington, and then you rematch Chiasson and Mayra Bueno Silva. We move on from there. We now have the main card losers. Already have this one filled in right here, Silva and Chiasson, because I said that they should be rematching on the last slide. Jiri Prochazka got KO'd. He takes a lot of damage, guys. Yuri takes a lot of damage, and he needs to fight somebody that is not as polished of a striker as Alex Pereira is. He takes advantage of every small opening. He just has Yuri's number at this point. And so I think that he should fight another former champ, because it's a bounce back for both of them. They both got knocked out by Alex Pereira in a matter of 2.5 months. You do Jiri Prochazka versus Jamal Hill, pay-per-view co-main event, fight night with fans, main event. Both of them need some time off. They both got knocked out. They both need some time off. Have them fight, pay-per-view co-main, fight night main event, like where are we at? We're in almost July. Have them fight in like November, December. That gives both of them a chance to win and work their way back towards a title shot. Jamal Hill needs a little bit more work, but I'm telling you, I don't even mind the idea of Jiri and Alex fighting a third time at some point. If they do what I think they should do and what I want them to do, is have Alex Pereira move up to heavyweight to fight somebody. The light heavyweight division is probably going to have like an interim title fight, or Pereira vacates and you have another vacant belt there again. And having two champs fight each other would make a whole lot of sense. So you have go up against Jamal Hill, and then that kind of can clear things up a little bit at light heavyweight, because the loser is going to be out of the title picture relatively permanently, in my opinion, especially if it's Jiri. If Jiri loses again, it clears things up, pushes one guy down, having to start fighting contenders, pushes another guy up where he could be in a number one contenders fight. So we move on from there. Co-main event loser, Dan Ige. Now, Dan Ige stepped in on 3.5 hours notice for the card, weighed in at 164, 165, made a catch weight, lost. This does not hurt Dan Ige's stock at all. He's already ranked. He filled in company man. He for sure got financially compensated for that a lot, but I still think that he earned something big for himself. And what I think that is a fight where he can get main event level pay, because they get paid more in main events. And so I think you give him an Apex Fight Night main event, because we're still doing Apex cards for some reason. You do an Apex Fight Night main event against Lerone Murphy, who just came off of a very impressive win against Edson Barbosa. But you do have a lot of people booked up, or Ige's already fought at 145. I think you do Ige versus Lerone Murphy later this year, like fall, Apex Fight Night main event. We move on from there to Anthony Smith, who lost a decision to Roman Dolidze. Terrible look to lose to a middleweight decisively on less than a week's notice, or who was on less than a week's notice. Anthony Smith sucks. He's delusional. He was for sure going to call for a title shot if he won this fight. You do Anthony Smith versus Dom Reyes. Dom Reyes is coming off of a knockout win over Dustin Jacoby just about 3 weeks ago. These guys are going to be on the same timeline. Smith didn't take a ton of damage. Reyes coming off of a win. Maybe have them fight each other September, October, something like that. Give him a little bit of time for Smith to recover, but give Smith a full camp. He fills in on short notice all the time. Dom Reyes, start working his way back up. Dom Reyes' run starts now. So that's what I have for Anthony Smith. Moving on from there, I have Michael Venom Page. Lost a decision to Ian Gary decisively. Boring fight, but decisively. Didn't have anything for Ian Gary in terms of defensive grappling. Michael Venom Page, not going to be in the title conversation anytime soon. Now that he has a loss, he's only 1-1 in the UFC. Somebody that's not booked, and I think that you have to make this fight now. This is a Fight Night main event, pay-per-view feature match. This is a fight they need to make. MVP versus Stephen Wonderboy Thompson. There's no other fight to make for either of these guys. They're both coming off of losses to top-level prospects. They're both a little bit older, similar striking styles. Make a very fan-friendly 5-round fight night with fans. This would sell out an arena with a good co-main event. Fantastic fight night main event. You do MVP versus Wonderboy. Wonderboy just lost. MVP still, even though he lost, I think he could still fight up in the rankings against like a Wonderboy just because of a name value and how awesome this fight would be. So I have Jiri fighting Jamal Hill, Dan Ige fighting Lerone Murphy in an Apex Fight Night main event, Anthony Smith and Dom Reyes, Chasson and Silva rematching, as I mentioned already. And then you have Michael Venom Page and Stephen Wonderboy Thompson in a Fight Night main event later this year. We move on to the prelim winners, as you can see, plus Brian Ortega. Now, we'll start off with Joe Pyfer. Absolutely smoked a very tough, even though he's a little bit of a journeyman, about 500 in the UFC, still a very tough game opponent in Marc-Andre Barrio. Put him away early. Time to get him back towards the top 15. Let's give him a fighter who will test his grappling and has a cardio to maybe test him again, but not too big of a name where he's going to be in the top 10 or top 7, something like that, after just one win. Joe Pyfer, Anthony Fluffy Hernandez. Hernandez just pulled out of a fight. He had an injury, so he's going to be recovering. Joe Pyfer is going to be wanting to recover a little bit from a training camp and a weight cut because the fight was very short. Later this year, maybe prelims on the Sphere, something like that. Maybe even an Apex main event. I might see that too. Pyfer versus Anthony Fluffy Hernandez. Very good test for both of them. Both young, up-and-coming guys. This is the fight to do for them. We move on next to Andrei Feely, who had a very entertaining fight, and he won against Cub Swanson in a split decision. Very fun striking battle. I think you put him with somebody else that is also very close to the rankings. Winner of this fight would get a ranked opponent. You do Andrei Feely and Nate the Train. Andrei Feely and Nate the Train has fight of the night potential. They're both unranked. It's the type of name value where it could be still the co-main event of a fight night. I mean, I'm telling you, if you do MVP and Wonder Boy main event, Andrei Feely, Nate the Train as co-main event, I'm telling you, it's not like some insane UFC Saudi Arabia or UFC Abu Dhabi fight night, but that's a really good card for a fight night, especially with the expectations that the UFC have set for us in the last like 3 years with fight night main events. We move on from there. Gian Silva missed weight and then TKO'd Charles Air Jourdain in the second round. I have to take a little bit of the shine off of his win because he missed weight. So you're not going to get a ranked opponent next. You're going to get Joe Anderson Brito, both two super physically imposing featherweights. Make them both make weight. Make them both go to war. Put it on the main card of an Apex fight, something like that, and let them decide who's going to get a ranked opponent, because Joe Anderson Brito called out Dan Ige forever, smoked Jack Shore, pulls out of his Ige fight once he gets it. Gian Silva misses weight. Can't really reward missing weight. You know, if he misses weight again, you got to move him up to 55. To Joe Anderson Brito and Gian Silva. We move on from there to Payton Talbott, probably the biggest up-and-coming star that the UFC has right now that's not all the way broken through. Payton Talbott absolutely smokes Giannis Gamori in 19 seconds, and he calls out Adrian Yanez. I think that's the fight that you do. Talbott and Yanez, very good fight, potential fraud check for Payton Talbott. And Yanez has been there, done that, been ranked, fought some very experienced bantamweights like Rob Font. If Talbot gets a win here, you give him a ranked opponent. We move on from there to Gillian Robertson, who retired Michelle Waterson-Gomez. Very impressive, dominant grappling performance with also some very improved striking. Her weight class is very booked up right now. I say you give her 12 ranked Luana Pinheiro. Matchup between that in two fighters in that like 10 to 15 range in the rankings. The rumor is that the UFC is going to go back to Canada sometime this year. Put Gillian Robertson versus Pinheiro on the main card for a Canadian fight night. Move on from there. You have Martin Buday, who just got a win over Andrei Arlovski. It was something of a sparring match, not a very impressive win, but I still think Arlovski is a good enough win at heavyweight to get you a ranked opponent, because it doesn't take much to get ranked at heavyweight. You have Martin Buday go up against Rodrigo Nascimento, who just lost to Derek Lewis in the St. Louis Fight Night main event. Fight for that 15 spot in the rankings. Gotta just like mix things up. You gotta give these guys tough tests at heavyweight, because there's so many just easy blobbish wins that you can get at heavyweight and just coast into like the top 10 at heavyweight. And then it's kind of a Shark Tank in that top like 7 or 8. But up until you get there, they're all trash. And so, you know, let one of these guys knock each other off. So we move on from there. Ray Tsuruya, very impressive, dominant grappling win against Carlos Hernandez. Hernandez is a tough night out. Tsuruya started fading in the third round. I don't think that you give him a ranked opponent just yet, but you give him somebody that's a tough night out, very experienced, also just fought and lost recently. You do Ray Tsuruya against Jimmy the Brick Flick. The grappling exchanges would be intense in that fight because the Flick is such a good wrestler. You put him up against Tsuruya. Winner of that gets a ranked opponent, something like that. We move on from there to Vinicius Oliveira. Absolutely cooked Ricky Simone. I think you give him a ranked opponent. I think that he was impressive enough against somebody that's been ranked. I think you give him a ranked opponent. You give him Jonathan Martinez, who's coming off of a loss to Jose Aldo. He had his big crack. He had his moment at one of the top guys. Didn't get the job done. Fairly kind of shit the bed. Now you got this Oliveira kid coming up. Super impressive prospect. Martinez has got to defend against this killer. Vinicius Oliveira against Jonathan Martinez, maybe at the Sphere sometime later this year, something like that. We move on from there to Brian T-City Ortega, who was originally going to fight at 155 in September. Pulled off of that fight to fight Diego Lopes at 145 this week on short notice. They change it to 55 and then he pulls out. Okay, Brian Ortega's done at 145 pounds. And I think that you give him somebody big name value, pay-per-view co-main event, big fight, jiu-jitsu exchanges would be awesome. You put him at 155 and you put him up against Charles Oliveira. You guys can't tell me that's not a sick fight. You do Charles Oliveira and Brian Ortega. Ortega's done at 145. He already wanted to be done with it before he accepted this fight. Ortega versus Oliveira, pay-per-view, co-main event. Book it. That's a sick fight. So there's what I have, guys. We have just a quick rundown for what I think we should do following UFC 303. We have Pereira, give him Jon Jones. Diego Lopes, Movsar Evloev. Hamzat versus Roman Dolidze. You rematch Chasson and Mayra Bueno Silva. And you do Ian Gary versus Colby Covington. Then for the losers on the main card, you do Jiri Prochazka versus Jamal Hill. You do Dan Ige versus Lerone Murphy, Apex Fight Night main event. You do Anthony Smith and Dom Reyes. Again, you rematch Chasson and Silva. You do Michael Page, Stephen Wonderboy Thompson, Fight Night main event with fans, not an Apex Fight Night main event. And then on the prelims, we do Joe Pyfer, Anthony Hernandez, another crack at the top 15. Andrei Feely, Nate the Train, winner gets a top 15 opponent. Gian Silva, Joe Anderson Brito, winner gets a top 15 opponent. Payton Talbott, Adrian Yanez, same thing, winner gets a ranked opponent. Big test, see if Payton Talbott gets fraud checked. Something like that. Gillian Robertson versus Luana Pinheiro, on the Canadian Fight Night card that's rumored to be happening later this year. You do Martin Badai against Rodrigo Nascimento for that 15 spot at heavyweight. You do Ray Tsuruya and Jimmy the Brick Flick. Winner gets a top 15 opponent at flyweight. Vinicius Oliveira taking a crack at the rankings against Jonathan Martinez. And then you have Brian Ortega moving up to 155. Pay-per-view co-main event against Charles Oliveira. So that's my fights to make after UFC 303. Let me know in the comments down below some fights that you'd like to see. Do you think that I was a little bit off on one of them? Let me know in the comments down below. Thanks for 1,000 subs. I'll see you next time. Thanks for watching. Make sure to like and subscribe. And if you want extra content aside from my regular videos, make sure to become a channel member today to get access to members-only live streams and other bonus perks. Click the link in the description down below, or click the join button on our channel homepage. If you're interested in non-MMA content from me, make sure to check out my personal channel, Wyatt's World.